kicking off the day with a great start is the Director of Mineral Resource Evaluation with Osisko Gold Royalties, who led the winning team of the Integra Gold Rush Challenge 2016, applying a combination of geology, virtual reality, weight of evidence, and machine learning techniques to identify the most prospective exploration targets. Today he's sharing his views on leveraging big data in mining. Please give a very warm welcome to Guy Desharnais.
Thank you very much. Thanks for BGR and Stefan Broda in particular for inviting me to speak with you today. I have a lot of material to get through, so I'm going to get going right away. So I'm a geologist. I'm not a data scientist. As a background, primarily what I do now for Osisko Gold Royalties is resource estimation. So I'm sort of the gatekeeper of investment. Osisko Gold Royalties invests in mining companies, and we get a portion of their gold back. And today the gold price is hitting record highs in Canadian and most other currencies. So it's a good day to be an employee of Osisko. So why am I here? There was a competition launched by a junior exploration company called Integra now 4 years ago. And essentially what they did is they took their block of property, only 4 kilometers by 4 kilometers. They had historical information there. They digitized everything and they released it as a crowdsourcing event. Anybody could provide an exploration plan, a target plan. And the prize was a total of $1 million. The first prize was $500,000. So those are my other colleagues here, Jean-Philippe Paiement, who's a geologist, and Doug Hadfield, who's a chemical engineer, but working as a geometallurgist. So we did a lot of geological information. We added more data. We did a lot of interpretation. So here you have a structural model with 3 different generations of faulting. Some of the lithologies were more prospective for carrying the gold, nice open cracks that stayed open for long periods of time. So we created a probabilistic model of the geology on the property in 3D. We also did alteration, geophysics. As much as we could, we interpreted into and interpolated within a block model 50 meters by 50 meters by 50 meters throughout the property to a depth of 2 kilometers. And then we did the traditional approach that we've seen elsewhere in exploration. Essentially, we use our expert opinion, our own biases going into the project, and we weighted all the different factors given how close we were to data, because we understood that as you get away from these punctual pieces of data, it gets more and more fuzzy, and then the weighting was changed depending on that. In parallel to that, all the data was already in the block model, and I asked Doug, can you do something smart on this, like something fancy that will help us win this competition? And he had been playing around with machine learning techniques, and the one that he chose was a Bayesian technique, so I'm happy that Bayes is coming back in 5 years. And essentially, he came up with a separate targeting map. We didn't have much time to challenge and go through, but essentially, there was a fairly good correspondence between what we felt as experts were good targets and what this separate targeting map delivered. And this is basically what we give. So this is a perfect example of how to communicate to your managers. Nice color map. You just drill the hot spots and off to the races you go. So we ended up winning the competition. So this guy here is not a machine learning expert. So I'm asking myself a few questions. How am I going to spend all this money? And also, people are going to expect me to know the machine learning techniques, so I better start learning. So essentially, I spent a couple of years after that extensively on YouTube and other online courses to learn what are some of the different methods, what are some of the traps, and the powerful aspects of machine learning. And so this is the basis of what I'm going to talk to you about today. And the main takeaway from all my learnings is machine learning in 90% of what we see is basically pattern recognition. You have a series of examples tagged with a version of the truth. You feed it to the algorithm. The algorithm learns the pattern that predicts the tag that you've provided. You give a new piece of data without the tag, and it fits in that tag. So generally, when we hear about machine learning, we think it's these overarching tools that are going to answer big questions. But the more I learn about how people are using machine learning in geosciences, the more I recognize that people are using it as one small tool within their toolbox. Like we use Excel to make graphs or to find correlations. We can use machine learning to solve small problems along the way for our everyday work. So unsupervised learning is basically clustering. So finding groups within the data, and this is two examples that are in 2D, but when you get into very complex data, obviously the computer has no problem seeing trends in data in 3D, 4D, or hyperspace, whereas a human has trouble in seeing that type of pattern. This is a very simple example, geochemistry of sedimentary rocks, and the way you display it is very important. So here we have the correspondence of the different rock types. The proximity with respect to the branches is how closely related they are. So the detrital rocks are on one side, the carbonates are on the other, and as you get into the different families of rocks, you can display. Technology is advancing very, very quickly, and it's actually accelerating. So the old technologies that we're used to seeing, for example, clothes washers, took decades for people to adapt and adopt and accept into their lives, whereas the newer technologies are taking a lot less time. So like the smart speakers that we were talking about yesterday, those are getting implemented much more quickly than previous technologies. Part of the reason for that is the cost of the hardware is going down really, really dramatically. Storage, for example, has gone to almost free. Amazon does not make profit by sending you toilet paper to your house. They make all of their profit on the web services, so storage and crunching data. The sensors are getting a lot cheaper. They're getting so cheap, in fact, that they're practically disposable. So people are starting to put them in situations where they don't expect to recover all of them. So we're putting them in blast holes and open pit mining, and we accept that there is going to be some attrition to those. We're also advancing new ways to bring those sensors out into our environment. So drones are a very fancy way of doing it, but my favorite robot now is Spot. So Spot is a robot by Boston Dynamics. They're currently semi-commercialized, and here you can see a scientist who has no fear of death by robot, dangerously abusing this poor, innocent animal. I don't know how he sleeps at night, but you can imagine we can deploy this in environments that are very difficult to navigate normally, and we can have him deploy him and have him walk around and do LiDAR in different scenarios or any number of sensors. So there's three factors or cases that I think that machine learning will thrive within geosciences, but in the world in general. First of all is menial tasks. So any job that's easy to explain, we can usually train a machine learning algorithm to do that for us. High complexity data, so humans that are used to seeing data overlaid one on top of each other, we can see 2-3 layers fairly easily. As we get into deeper and more rich data, we have trouble seeing through that. Computers have no problem doing that. And where there's a rapid reaction necessary, especially when we have an odd negative event. If you're going through security and you're looking through bags all day for a gun, eventually after 5 minutes you're basically getting lazy and you're just going through the motions without actually thinking about it. So often I get asked, well, are machines going to replace us? This is an interesting article which I think illustrates the situation very clearly. So jobs that are easy to explain, like telemarketers, where it's very binary, you either keep the person on the phone or they hang up on you, those are going to get replaced very quickly. Whereas jobs like event planners, where there's a lot of human interaction, soft skills, but also reasoning and troubleshooting, we're always going to need humans to do those types of jobs. So yeah, ask yourself, is your job more of a telemarketer or event planner in terms of the data? All kinds of problems with the data, and in geoscience in particular, we have messy, messy data. So this is an example of a classical problem in machine learning vision, where you have images that look almost indecipherable, and if these pictures make you hungry, just remind yourself half of those are actually dogs. And so we're faced with these edge cases. So for example, if we're doing a machine learning algorithm which is trying to define the difference between a coarse grained basalt and a fine grained gabbro, we need a lot of data with the real tags of those things that are very similar so that the algorithm has a chance to define them in real life. This is this is a conceptual exercise that illustrates very well the problem with the data. So imagine that your boss has told you, we need you to find a new mine, we need you to compile a whole area. In this case, it's in Abitibi in Quebec, a prolific mining area, dozens of mines. So you do all your homework, you do a new lithomap, geophysics, alteration, the whole kit, and then at the end you're like, geez, I can get air photos for free. So I'm going to go on Google Maps and take these, and I'm going to tag all of my data for mines. So these are 4 mines. So these are examples of success. So you've tagged these, and you can see that there's colorful lakes and gravel roads. So the machine learning algorithm is super lazy. It's going to ignore all of the beautiful geological work that you've done, and the compilation and the cleaning of the data, and it's go straight to the answer. So the answer it's going to find is, well, I know colorful lakes and gravel roads. I found you your new mines. It's the municipal dump and the Timmins Golf Course. Because it doesn't need all that other data. It's going to take the shortcut to the answer. And those are actually pretty good drill targets in the end, but just for proximity. So if we go back to mining in general, if we look at all the different stages of mining, from project generation, prospecting, drill testing, resource drilling, then the feasibility part, permitting and financing, mine startup, operation, and closure, including all the sustainability issues with final closure and all the deleterious elements. Which of those are in my estimation, going to be amenable to machine learning techniques? Well, I can imagine, because of either you're using the machine learning as a small tool in your toolkit to solve small problems, or big picture thinking that we can apply them to almost everything. The big gap, I think, is in this area here, where we're actually looking at what are the optimal scenarios for mining and production, and getting it to the production. There's so much troubleshooting and reasoning that needs to be done in that series, and so it's going to be hard to have, perfect applications of machine learning in those cases. There's already, in Quebec, actually, in Eastern Canada, there's a lot of small companies or startups or bigger companies that are applying machine learning. This is one example. It's basically using photos of core to predict lithology. This is not the end of core logging. It's basically a tool to help the geologist get a starter pack, and then we can make the interpretations after the fact. Geophysical data is particularly well suited for machine learning, so I include hyperspectral and all the satellite things that we talked about. You have nice homogeneous data over a wide span of area, very internally consistent, and we can make big leaps in that, both in 2D and 3D, so inversions, taking that 2D data into the third dimension. I think there's a lot of work can be done there. Exploration targeting, there's actually 4 companies that are offering this as a service in Quebec. And there's a company there, Azimut, that recently made a discovery. They've basically did a compilation of the entire province and found a new gold deposit based on that using machine learning techniques. Geotechnical work. This is a good example for me where we're used to doing in geosciences a very small amount of very high quality, very expensive tests, whereas I think for machine learning it's a lot more valuable to have a greater number, high number of more qualitative type of data, well calibrated, but we can use that to do a much better learning and then make predictions on what's going on. So here we have an example with smart bolts. So basically the bolt talks to you, you can collect that data in real time and make decisions to support your mining situations. Yesterday we talked about autonomous. We talked about what are going to be the big breakthroughs. For me, I wanted to put up my hand and talk about autonomous vehicles. This is not something that's emerging that we're going to see in the future. 2 years ago, Komatsu said that they had moved 2 billion tons, which is enormous, with autonomous vehicles. So that technology is here, it's being used, it's saving money, it's saving lives. It was funny, there was a press release saying there was an accident at a mine due to a Wi-Fi shortage. But if you read down, that makes a nice fancy headline, but if you read down, they actually drove 25 million kilometers before they had their first accident, which is incredible. But for me, one of the biggest applications is geometallurgy. This is not a new a new technology. Essentially, it's taking all of the data, putting into your block model so you can make smart decisions. So from your geochemistry, your mineralogy, your process recovery, all the way to the deleterious elements and how are you going to treat the tailings of your deposit downstream. If we look at the time span of mining, we typically see on a quarterly basis what the results are, but that level of resolution is terrible in terms of what's actually happening in processing plants. We typically are very extremely reactive in mining. And so if we can have better data and be able to make scheduling plans that are more intelligent, then we can just remove these low points, and the recovery and the economics of these deposits become significantly better. So this is just getting smarter about feeding the right types of tons to the processing plant at the right time. So I think we have a whole bunch of great technologies. If you look at what Gutenberg invented with a printing press, he took several technologies that were existing, he invented small parts to link them together in a very smart way, and change the world. I think we have today so many opportunities, so many technologies. It's just going to take a few Elon Musks to put them together in a smart way to change the way we think about mining. So a few lessons. Machine learning is simply pattern recognition. If you think about it that way, and if you're trying to solve problems, this is one way of doing it. Trust is a big issue. Communicating what you're going to develop and deliver, and keeping the managers up to date on what's the progress, and having realistic expectations is super important. Garbage in, garbage out. We've heard it several times yesterday. Data scientists spend on average 60 to 80% of their time cleaning their data. So the sexy part where you press go and you go for lunch and you come back and you have your answer, that's a very small part of the work. And there's a fallacy in mining where nobody wants to take the risk and be the first mover on new technology. Everybody wants to be the second. I think we need to be more bold in how we approach new technologies in mining. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Guy Desharnais. So I'd like to open up again to the audience for questions. Are there any questions that have come up? Yes.
Thanks very much for a very interesting talk about gold mining. The second last point you mentioned was data makes up 60 to 80% of the time. So I would be very interested from a gold mining perspective, what recipes you've found to address that challenge.
So I can talk for an hour about the problems with data. One of the main issues is that the data is not on a level playing field. So for example, all this image recognition, it's very simple. Everything's pixels in a box, and it's always pixels in a box. Whereas when we're talking about mining, we're talking about drill data, which is very punctual. We're talking about geophysics and alteration, things that are punctual, but we like to make them regional and 3D, so there's all the data issues with interpolation and how you treat that. I don't think there's any shortcuts, and I think this is why we're never going to get rid of geologists or experts in the application of machine learning. There's never going to be a point where a manager presses a button and doesn't need an expert to take a look at the data going in or the data going out. This is very important.
Thank you.
Just one last thing. So I have a few papers describing especially the exploration part, so if people are interested in learning more, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Guy Desharnais available on LinkedIn, so you can easily find me and I can send you those papers. Thank you. I don't know if there was any more questions. We have time?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Any more questions? Okay, otherwise you still have the opportunity afterwards in the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.